The wind came in restless from the ocean, brushing Hugh Jackman's hair back as he stood by the shore, watching waves crash against jagged rocks. He had arrived 3 days earlier to film a small indie drama on the remote coastline of Nova Scotia, a story about loss and memory, fitting for the kind of isolation this place carried in its bones. The film's crew had taken over a modest inn near the cliffs. It was old, the wood soft and creaky from years of salt and silence. Hugh had taken a liking to the stillness. Between shoots, he would often walk alone along the bluffs, past the worn-out lighthouse that hadn't functioned in decades. One morning, after a particularly heavy fog rolled in overnight, Hugh was sitting in the inn's front lounge, an old sunroom with lace curtains and chipped white paint, sipping strong black coffee when the innkeeper shuffled in. She was a thin, silver-haired woman named Marion, with kind eyes and a voice that crackled like an old vinyl record. "There's something for you," she said, handing him a yellowed envelope with no return address. The paper was brittle, the handwriting elegant and looping. But what caught Hugh's attention was the name on the front. To Elias Moore, lighthouse keeper. From Catherine. Hugh blinked. "I think this was delivered to the wrong person," he said. Marion shook her head. "No, it was meant for you. Found it at the lighthouse this morning, sitting right at the foot of the door like it had just been placed there." Hugh frowned. "But Elias Moore, that's not me." Her eyes flicked toward the window where the lighthouse stood silhouetted in the mist. "Elias died in 1947. There was a long pause. "Then how did this letter get there?" Marion shrugged, as though such mysteries were par for the course in this part of the world. "Maybe it's time it finally got delivered." Hugh turned the envelope in his hand. There was no stamp, no postmark, only the name and a feeling, deep in his chest, that this was more than some lost prop or prank. He opened it slowly, the paper trembling in his fingers. Inside was a letter, dated August 3rd, 1946. "My dearest Elias, if you're reading this, I can only hope the tides brought it to you in time. I've written and rewritten these words 1,000 times in my mind. I fear I may not see you again before the season ends. But I must ask you, please deliver the book to the place where it belongs. You'll know where. Always, Catherine." There was no book attached, no address, only the echo of a long-lost promise that had waited nearly 80 years to be heard. Hugh folded the letter back and stood, heart pounding. The lighthouse wasn't part of the film's set, but he was going back there now, not as an actor chasing lines, but as a man chasing a ghost. The path to the lighthouse wound through tall grass and jagged stone. With every step, Hugh Jackman felt the weight of the letter in his coat pocket, as though it were a tether pulling him into someone else's forgotten past. The lighthouse loomed ahead, weather-beaten, rust creeping along its railings, the lantern chamber now silent and dark. It hadn't been operational in decades, but something about it still felt alert, like a sentinel that hadn't yet forgotten its duty. The heavy oak door groaned as Hugh pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the morning light, filtering through cracked windows. The interior was musty, smelling of salt, wood rot, and time. A spiral staircase hugged the wall, climbing into shadow. Hugh stepped inside cautiously. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he scanned the empty watchroom. Maps curled at the corners were still pinned to the wall. A cracked compass lay on the desk next to a rusted oil lantern. Someone long ago had left in a hurry or never returned at all. He pulled out the letter and read it again. "Deliver the book to the place where it belongs. You'll know where." But what book and where? He turned toward the staircase and climbed, one slow step at a time. Each creak underfoot sounded like the groan of the past resisting intrusion. At the top was the lantern room, where glass panes circled the dome like tired eyes. The sea stretched endlessly on all sides, and in the center of the floor sat a box. Not dusty, not buried, recently placed. Small, wooden, with a silver clasp. Hugh knelt and opened it. Inside lay a faded, leather-bound journal. The front was embossed with delicate initials, E.M. He thumbed through the pages. Each one was filled with meticulous notes, sketches of stars, wave patterns, sailing routes. Then, scattered between them, letters addressed to Catherine. Some pages were tear-stained, others smudged with what might have been charcoal or blood. But they all bore a single recurring theme, a promise to deliver her book. And at the very bottom of the box, beneath the journal, Hugh found a slim, cloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it. A book. Its title read, by Songs for the Sea, a collection of lighthouse poems by Catherine Wren. On the inside cover, a handwritten dedication. "To Elias, for your lonely nights and watchful days, so you'll never feel the sea's silence alone." Catherine. Hugh sat back on his heels, stunned. The book had waited here, sealed in memory and salt air, untouched by time or hands. A breeze swept through the chamber, and for a moment it felt like the lighthouse exhaled. The letter, the journal, the book. Catherine's last request had never been fulfilled. Elias had died before he could honor her wish, and now, Mesham, it had found its way to Hugh. But where was this book meant to go? He flipped to the final page of the journal. A line was written in hurried ink. Deliver her voice to the chapel on Beacon's Hill. Let the ocean hear her once more. Beacon's Hill. Marion had mentioned it in passing, an old ruined chapel overlooking the bay, long abandoned, now visited only by seabirds and the rare wandering soul. Hugh stood clutching the book. He knew where he was going next, but this journey wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about closure, about carrying someone else's promise across decades of silence, and honoring a love that had outlived the hands that wrote it. The road to Beacon's Hill was narrow and old, lined with crumbling stone walls and thickets of gorse that clawed at Hugh's coat as he passed. The skies above had turned to a bruised gray, clouds gathering in a quiet storm, and the wind carried the scent of rain and salt. The book, still wrapped in its cloth, rested carefully in Hugh's satchel as he climbed the last steep path to the summit. At the top stood the chapel. It was more ruined than building now. Its roof collapsed long ago, and ivy had crept over the remaining stone walls like time itself was trying to reclaim it. Yet there was something solemn and sacred about it. The way it stood defiantly against the endless backdrop of sea and Scandi. The bell tower still held fast, its old iron bell rusted but upright, and beneath it, rows of broken pews faced a missing altar. Birds scattered as Hugh stepped inside, the echo of his footsteps merging with the sound of waves crashing far below. He found a place near the old altar, a stone slab worn smooth by rain and time. Carefully, reverently, he unwrapped Catherine's book. His fingers brushed over the faded fabric of the cover, over her name, Songs for the Sea. Then he placed it on the stone and stood back. The silence was overwhelming. A part of him expected something, thunder, light, the sudden appearance of someone watching. But there was only the wind and the call of gulls and the rhythm of the ocean. He read aloud the dedication. To Elias, for your lonely nights and watchful days, so you'll never feel the sea's silence alone. Then he opened to a page at random and began to read. The light that sways in storm and night belongs not to the keeper's hand, but to the promise, soft and slight, that love shall guide him back to land. His voice cracked on the final line. He looked up, blinking back tears. The chapel, broken, abandoned, felt fuller now, as if Catherine's words had drifted back into its stone, filling the hollow spaces that had waited years to hear them again. And then he noticed it, carved faintly into the stone wall behind the altar, almost invisible unless you were standing where he was. She still sings. E.M. It wasn't a trick of the light. The etching was real, faint, weathered, but real. Elias had come here, he had made it this far. But maybe by the time he did, it was too late to complete his promise. Or maybe he'd left the book behind in the lighthouse for someone, anyone, to one day carry his voice the rest of the way. And now, decades later, Hugh had done it. He reached into his pocket and took out the original letter, the one that had been mistakenly addressed to him on set, and which had begun this entire journey. He placed it next to the book. The rain started then, soft, misty, gentle. It fell through the broken ceiling of the chapel like a quiet blessing. Hugh remained still, head bowed. There was no applause, no dramatic moment of revelation. Just a sense of peace, profound and whole. He stood there until the clouds began to break, shafts of golden light piercing through, illuminating the chapel in an amber glow. Down below, the sea shimmered. Somewhere far off, the beam of another lighthouse turned faintly in the distance. Back in town, Marion waited. There were still questions to ask, pieces to fit together. But Hugh wasn't in a rush. Some stories, he now realized, weren't meant to be tied neatly with answers. They were meant to be felt. Before leaving, he took a photograph of the book resting on the stone slab, the letter beside it, and the etched message behind. Then, with one last look at the ocean, Hugh turned and walked back down the hill. He had delivered the words. He had delivered the love. And the sea, ever patient, ever listening, had remembered. Some stories aren't written in ink, but in echoes, in waves and in promises kept. If this journey moved you even half as much as it moved us, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who still believes in the power of memory. Subscribe for more true-hearted stories where compassion meets destiny. And in the comments, tell us, what forgotten promise would you deliver if given the chance?